What's going on, guys? So in today's video, we'll be looking at why effective field goal percentage as it's currently constructed should no longer be used as an advanced metric in today's game. Now, effective field goal percentage is an efficiency stat which can be seen on sites like ESPN.com, NBA.com, Basketball Reference, and many others, whose intended purpose it is to measure a player's effectiveness by taking into account the fact that a three-point shot is worth one more point than a two-point shot and incorporating that into its formula. So for example, if Larry Bird and Robert Parrish were to each take 10 shots throughout the course of a game and both make 5 of their 10 shots, then logically they would both finish with a field goal percentage of 50%. But because field goal percentage doesn't take into account the value of a three-point shot, then Larry Bird, who produced more points than Robert Parrish, would only be recognized through field goal percentage for his efficiency and not his effectiveness. But if we were to take their numbers and plug them into the effective field goal percentage formula, Larry Bird would then be rewarded for producing more points than Robert Parrish, even though they both made and missed the exact same amount of shots. Now, while the effective field goal percentage stat may seem correct given this example, it unfortunately doesn't correlate to what actually took place. Because had Larry Bird taken and made the most effective shot on the court each and every time, which is the three-point shot, then the most points he could have scored during that game would have been 30 points given his 10 shot attempts. But being that he only scored 12 out of a possible 30 points, then that would logically make him 40% effective, which is much lower than the 60% that the effective field goal percentage formula calculated. And even if we only took into account his shot selection, which consisted of 5 two-pointers and 5 three-pointers, then the most points he could have scored during that game, had he made each and every one of those shots, would have been 25 points. But even in that situation, scoring 12 out of those possible 25 points still only makes him 48% effective. So how is the 60% that the effective field goal percentage formula calculated an accurate depiction of what actually took place? The obvious answer is that it's not, and that's because the formula doesn't assess and calculate the value of a three-point shot correctly. Because while a three-point shot does count for 1.5 times the makes of a two-point shot in value, as in points, that isn't the same thing as making it count for 1.5 times the makes of a two-point shot in actual field goals made, as the formula suggests. Because the purpose of the three-point shot is to give players the opportunity to get 1.5 times the value of a two-point shot, which is 3 points, but do so in only one make. And in counting every three-point shot as 1.5 field goals made, not only does it undermine the purpose of the three-point shot itself, but it also negates a player's effectiveness as it unnecessarily increases their total field goals made. So for example, Klay Thompson of the Golden State Warriors scored 44 points in a game earlier this season against the Lakers on 17 of 20 from the field, including 10 of 11 from 3. So if we plug his numbers from that game into the effective field goal percentage formula, we'd see that the 10 field goals made which came from three-pointers now turn into 15 field goals made as per the formula. And when those 15 field goals made are added to the other 7, which came from two-pointers, this then gives him a grand total of 22 field goals made, which is 5 more than the 17 he actually made in the game. And by increasing his total field goals made, the formula has now credited Klay Thompson with more field goals made than field goals attempted, which then leads to him having an effective field goal percentage of 110% for the game. Now, although Klay Thompson had a great game that night, having missed 3 shots, not only was he not perfect, but based upon his stats, it is a mathematical impossibility for him to have been better than perfect. Yet the stat recognizes him as such. And when looking at just the past 2 NBA seasons, not only are there more than enough examples of players finishing games with an effective field goal percentage that exceeds the 100% threshold, but many have even gone as high as 150%, showing the inaccuracy of the stat and why it should no longer be used to measure a player's efficiency and effectiveness, which now leads us to the stat that should have been used all along, that being pure effective field goal percentage. Now, the first step in understanding pure effective field goal percentage as an efficiency stat is by first breaking down the main component of its formula, that being pure points per shot. Now, the traditional points per shot stat measures the number of points a player scores per field goal attempt by simply dividing their total points scored by their total field goals attempted. But because we're ultimately looking to assess a player's effectiveness in terms of only shooting the basketball, then there are certain elements within the points per shot formula that must be removed. The first one being free throw points, since these are points that are earned without utilizing an official field goal attempt. So for example, if James Harden was to score 38 points on 22 field goal attempts on a given night, this would usually translate to mean that he scored 1.72 points per shot. But because 8 of those 38 points came from the free throw line and not from his 22 field goals attempted, then they must be removed from the equation, as these are simply extra points that ultimately embellish and inflate his points per shot average and aren't reflective of his actual effectiveness in terms of strictly shooting the basketball. So a more accurate assessment of his effectiveness during that game would be that he scored 30 points on 22 field goal attempts, which translates to 1.36 points per shot, and added 8 points from the free throw line. Now, while removing free throw points from the equation does give us a better understanding of a player's effectiveness out on the court, it simply isn't enough. And that is due to the continuation rule that's currently in place. Because when a player gets fouled during a game and still manages to score, his made shot is counted as both a field goal made and a field goal attempted. But if that same player gets fouled and doesn't make the continuation shot, then he isn't penalized for the field goal made nor for the field goal attempted. So for example, if Anthony Davis was to go 7 of 12 from the field on a given night and be 3 for 8 on continuation shots, or shots when he was fouled while inactive shooting, this would logically add up to a total of 10 of 20 from the field. But because the continuation rule only counts the made continuation shots while dismissing the missed ones, his scoring numbers on the stat sheet would go from 10 of 20 from the field to 10 of 15 from the field. Now, although that rule is somewhat justified, since a player who is fouled while inactive shooting can't fully be held accountable for missing the continuation shot, it must be pointed out that only counting the made ones does skew the stat in a player's favor by making him seem much more efficient and effective than he actually is. This is why when we look at the league leaders for three-pointers made last season, we see that they all have a higher three-point percentage when their continuation shots are taken into account as opposed to when they're not. And this also holds true for the league leaders in two-pointers made last season, who also show a much higher two-point percentage with continuation shots as opposed to without. Which is why continuation shots and continuation points must also be removed from the points per shot formula, leaving us with a stat which can now be referred to as a player's pure points per shot. So now that we have this stat to turn to that accurately calculates a player's points per shot, we can now take this pure points per shot number and simply divide it by 3, which is the most points a player can generate per shot, and arrive at what we can now call a pure effective field goal percentage, which is 100% accurate and is by far the best metric to quantify a player's efficiency and effectiveness. But what also sets pure effective field goal percentage apart as an efficiency stat is that it's able to capture some of the nuances of the game of basketball that are oftentimes overlooked and implement them into its formula, which is something that cannot be said of the traditional effective field goal percentage stat, whose formula is flawed, inaccurate, and ultimately leaves much to be desired in the way of logical consistency.